Hey everybody. It's been a little too long since my last video, but I'm just going by God's prompts on when to do these, so I don't want to force it. I want him to just totally direct everything on these videos because I don't want it to be about me whatsoever. A few weeks has gone by, but today I felt like God was telling me to talk about the story of my twins and how He miraculously healed them. And it's such an incredible story. So I will try to make this not so long. So back in 2004, I found out I was pregnant for the second time. And I noticed that I was getting big pretty quickly. Everyone was saying it's your second pregnancy, you're naturally going to get bigger quicker than your first one, but this was like I looked like I was about 6 months pregnant when I was only about like 14 weeks along. So it was, I knew something was up. So I went and saw my doctor for my first checkup appointment for my pregnancy, and she said, yeah, there's no way you're 14 weeks. And I said, well, I am. I mean, what else could it be? And so she said, well, maybe you have twins. And I'm like, I doubt that, but okay. But sure enough, we did an ultrasound and found out there were 2 little babies in there. And I was super ecstatic. I just remember the thought of just unbelief that I would have twins. Like, that's just crazy to me. But she did have, I could tell she was a little reserved, though. She was not sharing our excitement. And she said that she could not see a membrane between them. And so she said that was a little concerning. So she sent me to a different place that had better imaging machinery that could detect it if it was there. So all that week, this was going to be a week later. So all that week, Josh and I were praying, that the membrane's there, everything's fine, and that they were in separate sacs, basically, is what we were hoping for. And so we go up there, and sure enough, they find the membrane that's separating the 2 of them. And, but I could tell the doctor he wasn't ecstatic, like he was not excited about it either. And so he asked us to step in his office. So we go in there, and he said, I don't know really how to tell you this, except for just to tell you, but, one baby is significantly smaller than the other. And actually one baby has hardly any amniotic fluid around him, and the other one is swimming basically in all this amniotic fluid. So one had hardly any, the other one had way too much. And he showed us the imagery of the 2 babies. He showed me Isaiah, who had all this space around him, all this fluid around him. And then there was Isaac, and he was literally scrunched in, like knees almost up to his chest, just balled up because he had no room. And the pressure from Isaiah's side was pushing in on him as well. So he had no room. He was literally bunched up onto the side. And he was worried that what was going on was that they were sharing one placenta, which can happen in some identical twins. And sometimes they might even share blood vessels in that placenta, which is not a good thing. It's called Twin-Twin Transfusion Syndrome. And it's where basically they're sharing blood and nutrients through the placenta because they're connected through blood vessels in the placenta. And usually one baby will dominate blood over the other. So one gets too much, the other gets too little, and a lot of times it ends up as one baby will pass away, or even both will pass away. Due to the fact that if one baby was to pass away, and those babies are connected through blood vessels, once that baby passes, the other baby, all his blood and nutrients is going into the deceased baby, but that blood is not being pumped back out because the baby is gone. So both babies can pass away at that point. And so he was explaining this to me and basically gave us a few options of what could do. Now, he didn't know if this is definitely what was going on, but this is what he suspected due to the levels of different amniotic fluid. And Isaac being a lot smaller, he was also a lot smaller than Isaiah. And so he gave us a few options. He said, there's this new procedure that just got introduced in the United States. Only 2 places in the United States are doing it right now. One was in Boston, I believe, and the other one was in Seattle. He said basically I could fly up to one of these cities and they would do this procedure where they would go in and cauterize the shared blood vessels in the placenta just to give them a fair chance. But along with that, there would be a very high risk of my water breaking, of all these other things that could go wrong. And it just didn't, I mean, the risks were very high to do it. Another option was to do amniocentesis every single week, where they go with a large needle and they take out amniotic fluid every week off of Isaiah's side to leaven out the pressure on both sides. But also that also has a lot of risks doing that. Doing that getting a large needle poked in your womb every week. I mean, that can have a lot of risks with it as well. And then there was the third option he gave me, which wasn't an option for me, was to terminate Isaac, to give Isaiah a fighting chance. Like if they were to tie off Isaiah's umbilical cord, it would give Isaiah a fully normal chance to make it. But that was not an option for me. I told him that right off the bat. I said, no, that's not an option for me. So basically he said, okay, well, these are your options, and you have your babies, if you don't do anything, your babies have less than a 20% chance of surviving your womb. And so I left, Josh and I were devastated. Here we are, we found out we had twins, and now we're finding out that we might never meet them. We never might get to do the twin things, it was just hard. I was so devastated. I was so crushed, and I couldn't stop crying. And that day, we get home, and I am just an absolute mess. I am beside myself. I can't console myself. There's nothing that's helping comfort me at all. And then Josh was reading his Bible, and we had our church that we were going to at the time had a evening service that day, and he read a Bible verse in James chapter 5, verse 14, and verse 14 through 15. And it says, "Is any among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well, and the Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven." So Josh was basically like, we need to take this literally. This is what the Bible says. We need to literally take this as God saying this. So we went ahead and we went to church that day, even though I did not want to. But we wanted to have the pastor and the elders pray over me and anoint me with oil and just put their hands on me and pray over me. And all throughout the church service, I could not stop crying. I just was so crushed. And after the service, we go up to the pastor, we tell him what's going on. And so he gathers his elders around me, and they anoint me with oil, and they pray over me. And as they're praying over me, I felt what I can best describe as warm honey pouring over my head. That's the best way I could describe it. But I knew it was God, and I knew he was telling me it was okay. And by the time they were done praying, I was no longer crying. I was actually laughing. And I just had this comfort and peace in knowing that God, he was there. I could feel his presence with us in that moment. And I just felt so comforted at that moment. And I never had an experience like that with God before, ever. Like I've always been a Christian. I've always, but not such an intimate moment like that with God. That's my first encounter, like true intimate encounter with God, was that night at that church. And so I left encouraged, and I stopped crying. I wasn't crying. I didn't even have the desire to cry the next day or the day after. But then the day after that, the doctor calls me and he says, I talked to the colleagues, and my colleagues in these cities, whatever, they said that they are more than willing to have you come out and they will do the procedure for you. And I just, told him, I said, no, I'm not going to do anything. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, I don't want to do any procedure. I want to give a 20% chance that you said my babies have, and I want to give it to God. And he didn't really know what to say. And he said, well, he said, expect your babies to pass away within the next couple of weeks. So we get off the phone, and of course I'm shaken up. I'm devastated again. You know, wondering what can I do? Like those options weren't even an options for me. Like that, having procedures done that have that high of a risk of something going wrong. I'm like, no, like God is going to take care of me. But just what his words though were just so discouraging to me, and so I was kind of back to crying and being discouraged. And all throughout those past few days, my husband and I were calling these prayer numbers on the local Christian channel, the CBN or TBN. And anytime we saw a new number come up, we would call, or 700 Club, we would call their prayer number and tell them, their situation. And they would always be like, oh, okay, well, we'll pray for you. And so, but one day, I think it was the day after I talked to the doctor, there was another number that came up, and this time it was a local number, which was weird because most of the time it's like a 1-800 number. But I just wasn't feeling it. I didn't want to call, and my husband was like, I'll call. So he calls, and I go in the back room because I don't want to talk to this lady or whoever it was. But then a few minutes later, he comes in the room. He's like, she wants to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. So I get on the phone, and it's this sweet, sweet lady. And so she's like, hey, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. So I tell her everything. I tell her what the doctor said and what happened at the church, and then what the doctor said, the day before. And she said something completely different than everyone else I had talked to on these prayer lines. She said, when are your babies due? And I told her the day, and she said, your babies are going to be fine. She said with absolute certainty that they were going to be totally fine. She said this doctor may know what he's talking about, but Dr. Jesus knows even more, and he knows better. And he's telling me to tell you right now that your babies are going to be totally fine. And she said, whenever you find out that they're going to be fine, I want you to call me back. So I was like, okay, so we saved her number, and the following week we went in for another ultrasound to see how things were progressing, if things were getting really bad, really worse, whatever. But, Josh and I were holding on to the hope that God had healed them. So we go in there, and the tech is taking measurements of their lengths, their size, and the amniotic fluid around them. And next thing I know, the doctor comes barging in, and he tells the tech, he's like, I'm going to take over. I want to do these measurements myself. So he goes and he starts taking these measurements himself. And he kind of is silent and quiet, and he says, okay, let's go in my office and talk. So Josh and I are looking at each other like, what's going on here? So we go into his office, and he has a puzzled look on his face, and he says, I don't know how else to say this, but your babies are almost normal. And I couldn't help but to shout out, it's God, it's God. And so then he rolled his eyes at me. He goes, but I know it was God. And he said, well, things like, he's like, with Twin-Twin Transfusion Syndrome, things don't get worse. Things do not get better. He said, this never gets better. This only gets worse. So he's like, don't be so optimistic about this. And so I said, no, this is God. This is God. He has his hands in this. And of course, he was very, very pessimistic the whole time, which, he's not a Christian. And he's just going by what he has learned in his medical field. So in his eyes, he was trying to be realistic, whatever. But, you know, when you don't have God in your life, you don't know about faith, you know, I could see why he would think that way. But anyway, so we got our miracle. Our baby's levels of our amniotic fluid was about normal. And I got to be about in the late 20s in my weeks. And Isaac kind of was slowing down and growing again. So they ended up putting me on bed rest. And by this time, I found another doctor. That other doctor was so pessimistic, and we just didn't want him around anymore. So we found another doctor who was way more optimistic. She was such a sweetheart, and so she kind of took over, and she directed me to another hospital who took me in and ended up putting me on bed rest by the time I was 28 weeks. And then by 30 weeks, they ended up deciding to go ahead and do an emergency C-section because Isaac, along with the Twin-Twin Syndrome, his umbilical cord was connected to the very edge of the placenta instead of in the middle. So it got to be to where the placenta was just couldn't handle Isaac much anymore. So they decided to go ahead and do an emergency C-section. Isaac was only 2.2 pounds and Isaiah was 2 pounds, 13 ounces. So tiny, tiny, tiny babies, born 10 weeks early. But I knew, even though I knew Isaac was having issues other than the TTTS, I had no fear. I had no worry. I knew God was going to take care of them. So they were in the NICU for 8 weeks. And after I found out that, after that day that God had healed them from the Twin-Twin Transfusion Syndrome, we did call that lady back. And the number was a non-working number. So I will leave that with you with however you think. I personally think I was talking to an angel. That's what I think. I don't think she was, I think God sent her to talk to me on the phone, like literally put her on the phone. That's the only way I can explain it. Because she was so different than everyone else. And sorry. Anyway, so I forgot that little tidbit to put in there after I found out that they were healed. We went to call her back to tell her, and it was a non-working number. So anyway, they ended up doing a lab test on the placenta to see if they did in fact have Twin-Twin Transfusion Syndrome. And they found 3 major blood vessels in that placenta that they were sharing. And so they were like, this is unheard of. Like, there's no way they should have made it. Sharing 3 blood vessels among each other. They said that they should not have made it this far in your in gestation. So God is good. And my twins are huge blessings to me today. They are such good kids, and they're so unique. And I've had people tell me who literally have just met them and just say, I don't know what it is about your twins, but I could tell that the hand of God is on them. And it just gives me goosebumps every time someone tells me that. And I also had God name the twins for me. Like, after I found out they were healed, I told God, I said, God, I want you to name these boys. These are your boys. I want you to name them. And so he immediately gave me the names of Isaac and Isaiah. So anyway, that's the story about my twins. This probably went a lot longer than I anticipated, but hopefully you stuck to the end. And I appreciate you guys listening to my stories about God. You know, he's just so good. He is so, so good. And he wants to be a part of our life so bad. He wants to be our friend. He wants to be our father. He wants to be our savior. He loves us so much. And I don't know if it'll be the next story I tell, but you know, not all my stories feel-good stories, you know. I mean, there's been things that he's had me go through. He's had me go through some valleys, you know, things that were really rough in my life, but I learned that he was always there. So even though I have a lot of good stories to tell, I will be sharing some ones that were rough on me, but they taught me how to grow closer to him and grow in my faith and mature in my faith. So anyway, I will end this here, but I hope you guys enjoy this story, and just please subscribe. Please like this video, because that's how the algorithm gets these videos out there, is sharing, liking, and subscribing. So anyway, I hope you guys are having a good day, and take care.